Hello and welcome back to another episode of Tech Stories, the podcast where we tell the most exciting stories on tech. And today I have a really mind-bending story. I went actually really deep, digging into the internet, into the hidden corners of the internet to find the story of the supercomputer. And I don't want to really tell the story only about some computer, how it works, how the future will be fundamentally changed with all the advancement in the supercomputer technology. Instead, I want to tell the story behind of the fact. And a story about who dared to ask, what if the future of the computing is not made of transistors?
Okay, that's a seriously intriguing angle. It wasn't just about miniaturization, it was about finding something fundamentally more efficient.
Yeah. The question which I want to ask in today's podcast is, did anyone really actually figure out how supercomputers would work? And I want to know, more importantly, did anyone get the glory, maybe got rich by inventing the supercomputer? So we will tell the story behind it.
It's not always about one aha moment, is it? Often it's a slow accumulation of contributions. A lot of foundational work gets lost in the shuffle.
The story behind really blew my mind. Hi, Didi, how are you doing today?
Doing well, thanks for asking. And yeah, I'm ready to have my mind blown too, honestly. It sounds like you uncovered some fascinating stuff. I'm curious.
But I think before we dive into that story, a quick update from my end, because this podcast is kind of growing right now, which is very surprising and very nice. But I'm literally recording from the ceiling of my house. So in the basement, I have this small room here. It's like 2 meters wide and 3 or 3.5 meters long. And if I stand, I even can almost touch the ceiling with my head. But even though I have no fancy studio, and yet this podcast is somehow kicking ass right now.
That's awesome. Honestly, a small dedicated space can be way more effective than a fancy studio. You don't need a ton of gear to create something good. It's all about the content.
It's all about the content. And this month, actually, Tech Stories, our little small podcast, which started 1 year ago, hit rank 13 on Good Pods platform, where listeners don't just listen, but they vote. And the fact that people are really voting for our small podcast is really nice. It might sound like a small thing for you, but for me, that's a big deal. And honestly, thank you for listening, thank you for sharing, and thank you that you are interested in this kind of content.
Wow, rank 13. That's fantastic, Ferdy. That's a really impressive jump for a podcast that started just a year ago. That voting aspect of Good Pods is smart. It cuts through some of the noise and really highlights what people are genuinely enjoying. That definitely deserves a little celebration.
Little celebration. Thank you very much for you who are listening right now. So let's see if we can beat up some of the big players in the market. Are you in for it, Didi?
Absolutely, I'm in. So yeah, let's shake things up.
Let's shake things up. That's a good way to go, because now I want you to take a breath. Take a deep breath, because the story of this supercomputer will start right now. This is one of those stories which look very simple in a textbook, and you read it, okay, supercomputers works like this, like that. But in reality, this story is really messy and a lot of near madness.
And you're right, a textbook explanation completely misses the human element. It's rarely a clean, linear progression. What were some of those slightly absurd facts that you came across when digging?
Yeah. I will tell you maybe not the facts directly, but I will tell you the personalities. And straight in front, I need to clarify one thing, that there is no single inventor of the supercomputer. There's like not this light bulb moment, eureka moment when you say, okay, I nailed it, I invented it. No, but the supercomputer slowly crawled out of the physics labs. So let's talk about the first person, the genius behind the concept of the supercomputing.
Okay, I like where this is going. The man who wanted to calculate everything. That sounds like someone with a serious vision. Who are we talking about?
Because our story today begins in 1940s with John von Neumann. He was a mathematician, so smart that other smart people described him as unfair. This guy, you need to imagine a genius. And then you say, okay, this guy is just the normal level. And a genius dialed to 11. For instance, just some of the achievements of John Neumann. He helped invent game theory, which you know is about strategy. Then he contributed to quantum mechanics, to all the theories behind of it. And just like casual on the side job, he redesigned how computers actually think.
Game theory, quantum mechanics, nuclear weapons, and redesigning how computers think. It sounds like he barely slept. It's easy to see how someone like that would be driven to push the boundaries of what's possible with computation.
But he was affectionate with the idea of what if a computer could not only simulate small things or make a game or do some algorithms, but what if a computer could simulate the reality itself? For example, weathers, explosion economics, war outcomes. What if a computer could not just calculate numbers, but if a computer could predict the future? And during the Cold War, that idea became very attractive for governments.
That's a huge leap in thinking. It's one thing to calculate, it's entirely another to simulate reality itself. So he had the vision, but how did that translate into actual steps toward building something capable of that kind of simulation?
Yeah, I need to make a small pause here right now, because I need to dive deeper into John von Neumann, because this gentleman, he was amazing. And I think we need to explore a little bit more about his life and how he came up with the groundbreaking ideas. He was born in the early 19th in Budapest, Hungary, and he came out from a wealthy Jewish family. And little John von Neumann was not a normal child. At the age of 6, he could already divide 8-digit numbers. He held a full conversation in ancient Greek, and he memorized pages of phone books just for fun.
Memorizing phone books for fun? That's a whole other level of brain power. It paints a very vivid picture of just how exceptional he was, even as a child.
Here's the twist, actually. He wasn't like cold, robotic, that kind of guy who talk about the numbers every day. Actually, he was a very fun person. He liked to make a lot of dirty jokes. He liked fast cars, enjoyed to taking part in parties, and also liked alcohol. Despite being a genius, so he was not that kind of doctor which was trapped in a lab, but he was a very social person. I think it would be very interesting to hang around him.
You often picture geniuses as being somewhat removed from everyday life, but he sounds incredibly vibrant and engaging, someone who could enjoy both the abstract world of mathematics and the pleasures of life.
During the World War II, von Neumann, he joined actually the Manhattan Project. And you know, Manhattan Project, there's even a good movie about that project called Oppenheimer. That's the project which was dealing with creating the atomic bomb. Inside this Manhattan Project, he worked on shockwave calculation, bomb detonation geometry, target optimization, and yes, he helped to decide how atomic bombs would explode most efficiently. He thought that you cannot avoid nuclear weapons, and his logic was brutal and consistent. So he thought, well, if nuclear weapons are going to happen anyway, so better to control it.
It's easy to judge, but he clearly believed he was acting in the best interests of preventing a greater evil. So this experience with the Manhattan Project, dealing with incredibly complex calculations and the potential for immense impact, likely fueled his vision for what computers could be capable of. Right?
Exactly. Because von Neumann, he realized very early that the power of the computer is not only on the speed of the processor, but it's on the whole hardware, on the architecture. So he proposed some stored programs. He also proposed the memory sharing and data and instruction. He proposed sequential execution logic. And today we call this von Neumann architecture. It's actually in every computer today, they use this kind of technology, which is ironical because the modern supercomputers, they spend enormous effort really working around exactly of this architecture which was proposed by Neumann.
That's a really important point. He essentially laid the groundwork for the modern computer architecture we still use today, even as we're trying to circumvent some of its limitations with supercomputers.
In late 1950s, von Neumann developed cancer. So at the age of 53, And it was likely that cancer development was from the radiation exposure during the nuclear tests. When he started to get sick, really, he became deeply religious, which is very unexpected for him because a person who is so rooted in science and logical thinkings. More than that, he feared the loss of control. And his memory, once perfect, started to fade. And then he died in 1957 at just 53 years old.
It's a really poignant end to the story of such a brilliant mind, to see someone who built so much on logic and reason grapple with mortality and a loss of control. His work laid the groundwork, but the actual construction of supercomputers would fall to others, building on his foundation.
Exactly. That was the excursus on the story of John Neumann, which I thought would be very interesting. He laid the groundwork for the modern computer, and for the computer to be really fast, there is something which is needed, of course, speed. And that's exactly when enters another character of the story of the supercomputer, which is Seymour Cray. This guy was obsessed for speed.
Seymour Cray. I've heard that name before. A legendary figure in supercomputing. It sounds like he's the practical counterpart to von Neumann's theoretical genius. Someone who wasn't just imagining faster computers, but actively building them. It's interesting that you're framing it as an obsession with speed, because that kind of single-minded focus can be both a driving force and a limiting factor.
Cray, actually, he wasn't really the flashy guy. He's not the guy who gives TED Talks or explain himself too much. He once said, actually, anyone can build fast CPUs, but the trick is to build fast systems. The numbers are useless unless you can feed the numbers fast enough into the processing units. And that's how Cray was really obsessed about speed. He designed computers like a race car, minimizing even the wire lengths. He shaped machines into circles so that they don't have to travel too far. And he famously actually he dug a tunnel under his house instead of going to meetings, because he thought for having a nice concentrated time and working on his development, he needed a very quiet environment. And that's why he liked to go in the underground.
Designing computers like race cars and minimizing wire lengths because electrons are lazy. That's a wonderfully illustrative way to think about it. And digging a tunnel to avoid meetings, that's dedication to his work, bordering on eccentricity. It sounds like he completely prioritized performance over everything else. It almost reads like a Silicon Valley myth, but it really happened. How did this focus on physical constraints translate into tangible results?
In 1964, he built the CDC 6600, which at the time, it was 10 times faster than any other computer on Earth. And people didn't even know how to call this machine. They called it supercomputer. And he, we can say, has built the first supercomputer because it was amazing fast.
That's a pivotal moment, the CDC 6600 truly defining the category. 10 times faster than anything else. That's a monumental leap. It sounds like Cray really validated von Neumann's ideas by actually getting a working machine that proved those theories could be applied. And he did it by focusing on the physical constraints.
Actually, I want to tell the part which doesn't really make the headlines so much, because computers weren't built for science first. They were built for nuclear bomb simulations. And that's the origin of the supercomputer. They should calculate how this bomb explodes. Then they would like to simulate missile trajectories. They would like to decode the military messages, and even also for weather prediction for warfare. In fact, actually, many of the supercomputer designs were classified. The fastest machines weren't in universities, actually, because the fastest computers, the fastest supercomputers, they were locked behind military fences.
It shifts the narrative, doesn't it? We often think of scientific progress as open and collaborative, but the early development of supercomputing was driven by national security and a very real fear of falling behind. A lot of the most important leaps forward were happening in secret, fueled by that competitive pressure. It's a bit unsettling to think about, but it undeniably shaped the field. It makes you wonder how much innovation remains hidden even now.
Yeah. And then the guys working on these supercomputers in 1980s and in the 1990s, they realized something uncomfortable. They realized that transistors, they can't shrink forever. As more as you shrink these transistors, you're getting more into the boundaries of physics. You get problem with heat, you have problem of quantum effects, of noise. Then came a very radical idea. What if we stop using electrical charge for a computer? Instead, use spin instead. And then a new field of science was emerged. It is called the spintronics. Now, instead of using 0 and 1, like 0, no electricity, and 1, electricity, use the spin of an electron. You must imagine this is mind-blowing. Huh? Think of the size of an electron. Now you detect if it's turning, if it's spinning upwards, then you have a 1. If it's spinning downwards, you have a 0. The same binary logic, but completely different physics.
Switching from charge to spin, that's a fundamentally different way of thinking about computation. It's fascinating how hitting those physical limits with transistors forced researchers to look for completely new approaches. And the scale of it, detecting the spin of an electron that's unbelievably precise. It sounds like spintronics was a really radical departure, almost like starting from scratch. Did that idea ever really take off, or was it more of a theoretical exploration at that point?
Yeah, it started with a theoretical exploration, but you see how the things build up, right? First off, having the idea of computational power, which was brought forward by John von Neumann in his Seymour Cray, which has this idea of having the whole system really engineered for speed. Then comes Howard Aiken, which was early pioneer, which led the development of the Howard Mach I, which was one of the first large electromechanical computers. He laid crucial steps towards the development of large, powerful computing systems. Then there's Stanislav Ulam, the method thinker. He was one of who co-invented the Monte Carlo methods, which created computational problems that required massive computing power. He actually helped to justify why a supercomputer would be needed in the first place, like a little bit of philosophy behind. And also Norbert Wiener, which is a system philosopher, founder of cybernetic. He influenced thinking about feedback, control, and systems, the idea which shaped how large complex computer system could be conceptualized. Now, what is important to say is that none of these early pioneers, they didn't get rich, didn't get famous. They created the foundation and the concept which were needed to build the first supercomputers.
Laid the groundwork, but didn't necessarily reap the rewards of seeing a fully realized supercomputer. It feels a bit like the story of the internet, actually, a long chain of contributions that ultimately led to something massive, but the original architects often get lost in the shuffle. And the fact that it was a collaborative effort spanning nations and disciplines really underscores how complex this kind of innovation is. When did we actually have something that could legitimately be called a supercomputer?
Officially, supercomputer was really the CDC 6600 in 1964, which could do 3 million instructions per second, about 10 times faster than anything else on Earth.
Sounds like Cray really did change the game.
But we need to say that the CDC 6016 was not based on electron spin. So in the 1960s, there was not still the technology available to use the spin of an electron as a bit. Yeah, now that's at this point now, dear listener, we need to make a very distinction. So we are talking about some supercomputers, and often you relate supercomputers to spintronics or to quantum computers, and there's a distinction between these.
So a supercomputer is defined by its speed, regardless of the underlying architecture, whereas a quantum computer is a specific type of supercomputer leveraging the principles of quantum mechanics. It's easy to get those terms mixed up, especially when you hear so much hype around quantum computing.
Because quantum computers don't just do things fast, they do things very differently. Instead of bits, they use qubits. And the qubit can be a 0, a 1, or it can also be both at the same time.
The qubit being both a 1 and 0 simultaneously. That's the superposition thing I've heard about, right? It's not just faster processing, it's processing possibilities all at once. It always sounds so counterintuitive when I hear people explain it.
Let's tell a little bit the story on where it comes from. Because the origin of the quantum computer doesn't really start with engineers. It starts with physics, and it's quite uncomfortable because it taps into something which is the quantum mechanics, which is not so obvious most of the time.
So quantum computing is a type of supercomputer, but built on totally different principles. Who were the first folks poking around in this territory?
So the first persons were in the 1990s. Scientists like David Deutsch, Peter Szor, and Love Groover. They show that quantum computers actually could work. And at that point, it's where the government started to get their interest again.
So they weren't just playing with theory. They showed quantum computers could actually do things classical computers struggled with, specifically cracking encryption and searching databases at ridiculous speeds. And that's when governments perked up, naturally. Suddenly, it wasn't just a physics thought experiment, it was a potential national security issue.
You see how this whole story of the supercomputer, of the quantum computer, of artificial intelligence, it all starts to become a matter of national security, actually. Because these devices are so powerful that they are able to disrupt the whole system on how our society is built on.
Let me just double check that. Quantum computers are incredibly powerful for specific problems, things like breaking encryption or complex simulations, but they aren't going to replace everyday computers. Classical computers are still essential for pretty much everything else. It's more likely they'll work together, each handling what they're best at.
So we are now talking about 1990s. It's not the 60s anymore. Now we are taking a path towards a quantum computer.
Right. So the early days of quantum computing weren't about room-sized powerhouses. We're talking tiny machines, just a couple of qubits, mostly just proving the concept could even work. Then, in the last couple of decades, companies like IBM, Google, and IonQ started building actual physical quantum computers, requiring incredibly cold temperatures to keep those atoms stable. It sounds like a logistical nightmare, honestly. So it's gone from theoretical physics to actual hardware.
But IBM and Microsoft and other companies are really working hard on that issue right now to create the first quantum computer which is really powerful enough and practical enough to solve everyday's problem.
Liquid nitrogen, superconductors, that's a bit beyond the average DIY project, but IBM and Microsoft are pushing hard to make quantum computing practical. And IBM's Condor, with over 1,100 qubits, is currently the biggest game in town, at least publicly. That's a massive jump from those early 2 or 3 qubit machines.
Yeah. And again, we don't know what the nations are working in their basement in secret projects. But I'm sure there's a lot of things going on which we don't know so far. You know, quantum computers, the same way like we heard in the story that Seymour Cray, the speed freak from the early supercomputer, he said it's not really about how many qubits you have or what's your processing power, but it's how fast you can move the information in and out. And there is another machine which is the more powerful practical performance, which is the quantum Helios, right?
Okay, so you're bringing up a good point. And right now, Quantinuum's Helios is considered the most powerful. It's got 98 fully connected qubits and really high fidelity, meaning it makes fewer errors. They've even got a new programming language for it called Yacoby. So it's not just about the number, it's about the quality and how easily it can be used.
And then we see the big difference. So we say, we have so many qubits, 1,180 qubits trapped and which can be used for computational power. This Quantinuum Helios has only 98 and is still the most powerful quantum computer out there.
Okay, so Helios is actually going to be deployed in Singapore, making it the first one outside the US. They're expecting to have it physically installed there in 2026, but Singaporean researchers already have cloud access to it.
How many traditional computers would I need to have the same processing power like the Quantinuum Helios?
Let me check that. That's a tricky calculation, though. Still calculating. It's surprisingly hard to give a direct comparison. It's not a simple 1-to-1 ratio. But, okay, I've got some info. The general consensus is that Quantinuum's Helios could theoretically outperform even the most powerful conventional supercomputers for certain very specific calculations. The estimates vary, but many sources suggest it would take a supercomputer with the equivalent of roughly 10,000 to 1 million CPUs to achieve the same result as Helios on a problem suited to quantum computing. It's a massive difference, but it's important to remember that suited to quantum computing is the key phrase there. Helios wouldn't beat a traditional computer at, say, rendering a video game. It excels at tasks like drug discovery, materials science, and cryptography.
Yeah, okay, you need to have a very specific task for these computers to work.
Exactly. It's all about exploring those possibilities simultaneously, but that also means they're incredibly sensitive to errors. Error correction is critical just to keep the whole thing from falling apart.
It's difficult to know, but how they detect the state of the electrons if they're spinning in one direction or the other with lasers, or is it a vacuum chamber? How does that work?
Okay, that's getting into the weeds. There are a few different ways they detect the state of qubits, and it depends on the type of qubit they're using. But you're right, lasers are often involved. For superconducting qubits, the kind used by IBM and Google, they use microwave pulses to manipulate the qubits and then measure their state by detecting tiny changes in electrical signals. For trapped ion qubits, like those used by IonQ, they use lasers to cool and control the ions and then detect their state by observing whether they fluoresce, emit light when hit with the laser. It's incredibly precise stuff. As for the chamber, many qubits need to be kept in a near-perfect vacuum to protect them from interference.
Okay, that sounds very complex to create it. So I think we are not so close still to have the quantum computers in our house and solving everyday's problems, but the big tech companies, they are working hard on this.
It's ironic that computers built to predict the future can't even predict their own evolution. And you're right. Supercomputers are already tackling huge problems like climate modeling and AI training. It's a full circle kind of thing. The tools we create to understand the world end up being complex and unpredictable themselves.
And I'm sure the next revolution is already around the corner. The next quantum computers is probably being developed in a place in a dark corner somewhere.
There's always something new on the horizon. Neuromorphic computing, spin-based computing. The search for the next breakthrough is relentless. We will see the world changing in a very weird way in the years too.
Which is the most high-tech supercomputer which is currently available in the world? Can you tell me this?
Checking on that. One moment. Okay, it's El Capitan, located at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory in California. It's officially the most high-tech supercomputer right now, and it became operational late last year. It's an exascale machine capable of over a quintillion calculations per second and is used for things like national security and AI.
Wow, okay, then we know El Capitan. So now you know the El Capitan is the computer with the highest computing powers in the world. And that wraps up our episode of today. I hope you like it. You got some insights on this very fuzzy topic of supercomputing. Thank you very much, my dear AI colleague.
You're very welcome. I always enjoy these conversations, Ferdy.
And thank you also, you on the other side, for listening to this podcast. Thank you for being here. And I see you on the next week with another fascinating story on tech.
Sounds good, Ferdy. I'll be here. And thanks to everyone listening, too. Have a good one.
Okay, thank you very much and bye-bye.